we'll give it a couple minutes once it's open, just to let people come in. But
okay,
I'll
great.
plug in and yeah.
I can go ahead and start it, Natalie. Okay.
Okay, great.
Starting it now.
And Joe, let's have you go ahead and mute now with *6. Thank you. Hi, folks. If you're just coming on for the third Shellfish Day, we're just going to give it a couple minutes to let people log on, and then we'll be starting soon. Just go another like half minute or minute, and then we'll jump right in. It's always good to start with the awkward silence. Almost there. If you're just tuning in, we're going to start in about half a minute for this third Shellfish Focus Day event. Hi, Mike. Welcome aboard. We're just about to start.
All right.
Great. Mike, if you want to go ahead and mute your sound, that would be great. Thank you. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We still have a couple of panelists who are going to log on here any second, but considering it's 4 minutes after 2, I think we should go ahead and hop on. So welcome to Shellfish Focus Day number 3, From the Mud to Your Plate, Shellfish Markets and the Seafood Supply Chain. This is the last in a 3-part series of events to highlight Maine's shellfish populations and shellfish industries. This series is being sponsored by the Maine Fishermen's Forum as part of the suite of programs that the forum is offering this year in lieu of its in-person annual event, which, as we know, got canceled due to the global pandemic. And as many people know, the full Thursday agenda at the Maine Fishermen's Forum is usually dedicated to sharing information and research updates and all kinds of good information related to the Maine shellfish industry and habitats. And so this webinar series has been an attempt to keep the information flowing, and we've been thrilled to see how that's been happening, even though we're in a virtual format. My name is Natalie Springle. I work for the Maine Sea Grant Program at the University of Maine, and I'm excited to be with you all here today and to help this facilitate our conversation with all of our guests and all of you who are participating on the webinar. And I wanted to let you know a couple nuts and bolts real quick. This is being recorded, and a shortened version of this recording will be rebroadcast on the radio on Friday, April 23rd from 4 to 5 p.m. on Maine Sea Grant's monthly public affairs program called Coastal Conversations, which airs on WERU Community Radio 89.9 FM. And it also streams online at weru.org. This broadcast and the previous two webinars are also all available for listening anytime after the broadcasts. And just for folks who weren't able to attend the previous events, just so folks know what we've covered, the first topic in the series covered shellfish harvesting and included efforts to restore clam flats in various areas of the coast. And the second webinar covered what changes harvesters and scientists are seeing on the mudflats. So let's come up to today. Today, we're talking about shellfish markets and the seafood supply chain. And I'm excited to hear from each of our panelists today as the path that a clam or another shellfish travels from the mud to our plates can be confusing, and it's often unknown or even invisible to consumers. And we have some great guests here today who can help us tease all that out and understand how it works and how it fits in within the context of the shellfish economy. The first person I wanted to introduce is my co-facilitator for this webinar, and that's Jessica Joyce. Jessica is with Tidal Bay Consulting, and she's also on the Maine Shellfish Advisory Council. And Jessica also coordinated much of this event. So Jessica, welcome. I'm looking forward to facilitating this with you.
Thanks, Natalie. Likewise, I know this isn't quite the same as the in-person forum and Shellfish Focus Day, but we've had some good conversations in the first two, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Great. So Jessica and I are joined by a variety of panelists who each play a role at various sort of levels of the seafood supply chain. And those panelists include Mike Danforth. Mike, maybe you want to turn on your screen just so people can take a look at you. Mike is the operations manager at Maine Shellfish. He's also on the Shellfish Advisory Council and on the Maine Department of Marine Resources Advisory Council. Hi, Mike. Welcome aboard. You're busy. Great to have you. We'll let you get settled in. Other folks that we have we have Barbara Scully, who's the owner of Scully's Sea Products, and she's a commercial harvester. Hi, Barbara. Great to see you. And then we also have Joe Parada. Joe Parada is a commercial harvester and chair of the Frenchman Bay Regional Shellfish Committee. And Joe is joining us by phone today. Hi, Joe. Are you able to say hello?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
We have a few other folks who are going to be trickling in. I'll just let you know who we're expecting to have trickle in the next little bit here. We're expecting Tim Sheehan, who's the owner of Gulf of Maine, Inc., and a commercial harvester out of Pembroke. We have Quang Nguyen, whose pronunciation I'm sure I butchered, and we'll ask him to say it right. He's the owner of Fisherman's Net out of Portland. And then we're going to have Bo Marsh, who's an operator at Community Shellfish Company. And we also have with us here today Cole Canwett, who's the director of the Bureau of Public Health at the Maine Department of Marine Resources. Hi, Cole. Welcome aboard.
Oh, happy to be here.
Great. Great. Let's see, did I miss anyone? Let me make sure I'm looking. Nope, I think I got everyone except for Charles. We have an incredible lineup today. Thanks all of you for being here. And I am excited to introduce Charles Rudlich. Charles is going to help us set the stage today and give us a little bit of context. We've asked Charles specifically to help set the context for our conversation related to sort of the economic trends associated with the shellfish industry for the last several decades. So let's go ahead and pull up Charles's slides, and I will let you take it from here, Charles.
Thank you. Hopefully my slides are visible.
Let's see, they are not visible yet. There we go, they're coming. Now they are visible.
Good, thank you. So my name is Charles Rutledge. I'm the Executive Director of the Sunrise County Economic Council, which is an economic development group in Washington County. We're also a partner in the Down East Fisheries Partnership, which is a 9-agency effort to essentially sustain and expand the commercial fisheries in eastern Maine, and to help the communities that rely on them. Is it okay, Natalie, if I just kind of go into the presentation? Okay.
Yes, go for it. Sorry, I was on mute. Of course, you have to do it at least once per webinar.
I just want to start with a, high-level view of commercial fishing in Maine. It's a massive industry. Even last year during the pandemic, over 500 million in value, essentially at the dockside. And just in context, that's like 2 paper mills. It's half the size of the Washington County total economy. It's more money than the federal and state governments pay for healthcare for everyone who lives in Hancock and Washington County. It's just a major part of the Maine economy. It's really dominated by lobster, as all of you know, but as you can see here, looking at 2020, lobster is a little under 80%, other species about 18%, and then clams and quahogs, shellfish, about 4%. So a relatively small part of a very major industry. This is another way of looking at value over the last few years. Again, you can see that shellfish are between 4 and 5% in most years, but commercial fishing is incredibly important. And even at 4 or 5%, the value of clam and quahogs are significant. We're talking around 20 million most years. And it means it's the primary means of support. It's how hundreds of families make their way in the world through clamming. And it's a supplemental income for thousands of families in Maine. So very important to coastal communities, very important to this overall commercial fishing sector, which of course is one of the major economic drivers in coastal Maine. So I should go back to this. So we're talking, a harvest of, again, between 15, 20 million, depending on the year. I want to place that in a longer context. This actually looks at the last 70 years of softshell clams. I should mention softshell clams are usually about 80% of the total value of that clam and quahog sector, which, as I said before, was between 4 and 5% of the total landings. So the biggest part of that sector, softshell clams, and this looks at that landings value over a much longer time frame. This looks at 70 years. And it's a way of showing that we're actually at a relative low point in the value of softshell clams in real dollars being landed in Maine. And we're actually at an even lower point when you look in pounds. So this is a, sorry to go so quick, but what I was hoping to get across was, one, commercial fishing, one of the major drivers of the coastal economy, one of the major drivers of the Maine economy, incredibly important. Softshell clams and quahogs are a relatively small portion of that at 4 or 5% value, but still critically important for a few hundred families, where the fishing makes up a key part of that family's income, and it provides supplemental income for thousands of families across the coast. So an important source of supplemental income also. Most of that's being driven by softshell clams, and softshell clams at a relatively low point, at a very low point when you look at harvest in just volume, in the actual weight of meats that are being landed, or clams that are being landed, live weights. And also at a relatively low point in value, even though the value has gone up a little bit. So it's blunted some of the impact of the lower amounts that are being landed. But we're definitely looking at a critical industry that's in a period of stress. And the one other thing I wanted to mention, which is actually something I don't have a graph for, is we don't have a lot of insight into what happens in value between when the clam is sold to the first dealer and when it reaches its end user. We think there's obviously a lot more economic activity there. There's a lot of value added, and I think the panel will shed a lot of light on that today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. But there's a lot we don't know about how much value, how much economic activity happens in that space between when the clam is sold from the harvester to a dealer and when it finally is eaten by someone.
Thank you, Charles. That space really between when it's harvested to when it's consumed, it's really interesting. What I'm hearing you say is that that space is the information and the data that we have about sort of the economic trajectory of the organism. The data that we have is anecdotal, and so if I'm understanding you correctly, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panelists to help us kind of flesh out, well, what does that look like and how does that work? So thanks, Charles, for your context there, the economic context. I wanted to mention to everyone, if you have questions or comments, feel free to use the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your screen. There's an icon for Q&A. And feel free to put your questions up at any time. We're going to go through our speakers before we address the Q&A. So if you already have questions for Charles, feel free to ask him. Charles is a wealth of knowledge of economic data and has a really good grasp on the shellfish sort of picture. So feel free to put some questions in there and we'll try to get them up later. But I did want to, now that we have a little bit of context, I wanted to give our panelists, the dealers and the buyers, a chance to kind of introduce yourselves and to tell us your story a little bit, sort of how you got going in this industry and what it is that you really do and what your role is. And maybe let's start with Mike Danforth from Maine Shellfish.
I was hoping you were not going to do that to me.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Getting back to the previous gentleman's presentation, it was really good, but a different way of thinking about that 4 or 5% that comes from the actual shellfish industry, that's direct money that's going into people's checking accounts. There's no boat payments, there's no bank interest, there's no fuel bills and all that stuff coming out of that money. That's $20 million that actually goes into people's homes that's making a living. There's very little overhead to harvesting those species in gear or daily expense. So the 4 or 5%, in my opinion, as an economic booster, is fairly low. I mean, of course, it would be just my opinion, but I think that 4 or 5% really takes care of a lot more people than what it's given credit for, I guess. But with myself, I started out digging clams in a little town called Cutler, Maine, as a young man, or a young child, actually, and went on to become a commercial fisherman, and did that for almost 2 decades, and tried a couple other careers, merchant marine and whatnot, and ended up here at Maine Shellfish as the operations manager. I guess what that means is I have my hands in every part of the business, so to speak. But we buy steamers and hard shell clams, mussels, oysters, all that kind of stuff off harvesters, aquaculturists, and whatnot. And the steamers or the soft shell clams, we break down into smaller packages, as low as 2-pound packages for certain restaurants or takeouts or accounts. We shuck a few of the clams, depending on what the market wants or whether the whole live market is what's in demand at the time, or the shuck clam market, what we do with the product after we get it. We break, we'll bring in bushels, break them down into increments that whatever customer calls us during the night orders, from anywhere from bushels of the product to as low as 2-pound orders, and deliver them all over the state of Maine on a daily basis. So, the product goes from us, it gets washed up, culled, cleaned, all of the paperwork and the tracking and whatnot is done electronically here at Maine Shell, which is a good thing. And somebody buys a gallon of clams off us, and I can tell you what digger and what flat that clam came from, no matter where we deliver certain gallons or certain lots of gallons or certain parts of bushels. Other than that, I mean, we do mark them up. There's a certain amount of shrinkage that comes with bushels. I mean, you pay for a 50-pound bushel, and if you keep it overnight or 2 days, it turns into a 46-pound bushel. So the volume measurement turns into a weight measurement, and that of course comes out of our over what we make. But other than that, are there any questions in what we do with the products or anything like that? I mean, some of the gallons we do freeze for later use. We intentionally freeze. We do not take clams and hold them for very long. We shuck, and anything with a date over 2 or 3 days gets frozen for later use, or if the flats closed due to rain or something like that, our customers have another option as far as a usable product to fall back on. But any questions for me, I'd take them anytime.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I'm sure that we will have questions for you. Let's get everyone introduced so we have a sense of everyone here. And then we'll launch the questions. So let's go with Barbara Scully. You are a buyer and a harvester, and you do all kinds of things. And your business is Scully Sea Products. Tell us a little bit about what you do, how you got into it, and what the scope of your business is.
Hi, my original background is as a marine scientist. And for a period of time, for 12 and a half years, I actually worked at the Department of Marine Resources, which is where Cole currently works. I've worked periodically with Bigelow Labs, but I was always quite interested in commercial fisheries and how science could help just help protect and develop sustainable fisheries. So in my first life, I owned Glidden Point Oyster Sea Farm. So I was an aquaculture business. And so during that, I was shipping nationwide large quantities of oysters that either I grew myself or other shellfish that I was buying from diggers, harvesters, or from wholesale dealers. And I sold that business about 6 years ago, five years ago. And now I'm doing something that's much more, I call it quiet. It's still quite busy, but I'm a commercial harvester myself of wild oysters and littlenecks. My business also buys from other commercial harvesters. My business also buys from some wholesale dealers, and I have a small retail shop in the yard. I have a website that ships FedEx overnight or 2-day nationwide. And I also have a distribution to a number of local restaurants in the state of Maine. So I don't do anything out of state in terms of large wholesaling anymore. Everything that I do out of state now is whatever can be shipped effectively using FedEx.
Thank you, Barb. It's so interesting to hear the diverse scope of what you do. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you as this session continues. Let's go next to Joe Parada, who is on the phone with us. Joe, when you get a moment, go ahead and *6 to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into it and what you're mostly focusing on these days.
Well, I moved here in 1983 with $600 in a tent, thinking I'd get a bartending waiting job, and which I did. And then I met a clam digger, and for some reason, a couple of them took a liking to me and showed me how to do it. And so since then, I've with a couple of years of different things. Like I worked managing a restaurant in Bar Harbor for 3 years. I worked at Maine Shellfish briefly before Mike was there. And I've worked in a couple of restaurants doing odds and ends, but pretty much with, like I said, a couple of gaps have clammed ever since 1983, and pretty much solid clamming for the past probably 5 years. Digging some quahogs, and of late mostly soft shell clams because it's just been a lot more lucrative. Like today, I dug 221 pounds of soft shells, which was pretty good. And so now I sell. There's a woman down east, DLK Seafood, who likes to buy my clams when I have small ones. So when I have stuff that's pretty much all under 3 inches, she gets those for her shucking shop a couple days a week usually. But like today, the ones I dug were probably an average of 3.25. I think they'd probably even be too big for Mike at Maine Shellfish for what their uses are. But there are a couple buyers that like those and have no problem taking them. So yeah, so the past few years I've been pretty much solely harvesting soft shell clams. I've dabbled in quahog aquaculture a little bit up here. That didn't really work, mostly for sort of a labor issue and time spent from my perspective. So I kind of got out of that. I'm going to begin playing with a few oysters again this summer. I've got 50,000 small 9 to 13 millimeter ones coming, just a sort of a hobby project, I guess, my non-retirement fund, I've been calling it. So yeah, I sell a few to Maine Shellfish on occasion. Mostly I sell to Trenton Bridge Lobster Pound, and some go to a shucking shop down east, DLK Seafoods. That's pretty much what I'm doing now.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. Look forward to hearing more from you as we progress. It looks like we've got one more person who's joined us from the dealer perspective, Quang. I hope I'm saying your name right. Are you able to hop on? Is your connection? I heard you were having a hard time connecting.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Great. Welcome aboard. Yes, I can hear you. So if you just want to introduce yourself and share what your business is and how you got into it and sort of what the scope is of what your business does.
Sure, yeah. My name is Quang and I own a little seafood store in Portland, Maine. I took over the business about 2.5 years ago. It was there supporting local business, local community for a while, fisherman net. But then we kind of changed the strategy, still focus on local, but then start picking up my niche market, which is the Asian community across the country, shipping lobster overnight, and also adding steamer, quahog, and all of the other seafood on top of it as a value-added product on top of the lobster. And steamer has been, one of my very popular products added to the lobster as a combo package. We buy directly from the harvester. They bring in like twice a week, and we store them, we pack them, and then it comes to the consumer, and then it start, getting the word out for people that, besides lobster, that we have also other products in Maine that's really good, really well known as well. So that's where I'm at.
Great, thank you. It's great to have you. Looking forward to hearing your stories.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think that we have heard from all of our dealers and buyers. At some point in this conversation, I'm going to want you guys to define some of these terms, dealers and buyers and that sort of thing. But first, we wanted to ask a question of Cole to help us set the stage also in terms of what do folks in the seafood supply chain need to pay attention to in terms of public health. And Cole is with the Department of Marine Resources, with the Public Health Department. So it seemed like a great opportunity to kind of get some foundations in place about the public health questions related to shellfish. Cole, welcome.
Hi, Natalie. I appreciate being part of this panel, and I would just like to, sort of frame the whole bivalve shellfish industry as really it's very significant to have shellfish sanitation in place. And in Maine, the Department of Marine Resources is the sole authority, that's what it's called, for basically implementing the National Shellfish Sanitation Program throughout the state. And what that deals with is bivalve shellfish. So think of anything with two shells, like clams, oysters, mussels. And the reason that we have a specific interest, or the nation as a whole has a specific interest in bivalve shellfish, is because they're filter feeders. And so they feed, they filter the water and take particles out of the water and take them into their bodies. And then we eat the animals whole and sometimes raw, or what's considered, undercooked by, say, maybe FDA standards, even if you steam clams. So shellfish sanitation is really important. And the premise is that if the water that they're grown in is clean, then the shellfish themselves are going to be clean. And then we ensure, as the department, that we're classifying the shellfish growing areas to be sure that that water's clean from potential pollutants, whether they're fecal coliform type sources or chemical or anything else that you can imagine. Also marine biotoxins, which occur naturally. And we classify those growing areas, and then harvesters harvest the shellfish, and then they go to dealers. And we also inspect the dealers, ensure that the dealers have sanitary conditions, that the way they're handling the product keeps it clean and safe. And so, the bottom line is that if you're buying Maine shellfish from certified shellfish dealers, you can be completely confident that it's absolutely safe. And that's what our job is, sort of in the background of all the growing and marketing and sales.
Great, thank you, Cole. And I wondered if I could call on Barb for a second, because Barb, it sounds like you have had a foot in several different places, including being with DMR at one point, and now you're on the business side of the equation. What would be some things that you think we ought to make sure that we talk about related to this question of public safety?
Okay, yes. I think the consumers really have a responsibility themselves to make sure that, like Cole said, they're buying from a dealer that they can trust, from a source that they can trust. And, so pay attention to the things like the details. Is it clean? Does it smell good? Does it smell bad? Are the people inside behaving in a professional manner? There is a lot that goes on behind the scenes in keeping the shellfish safe and in that way keeping the people safe. And one thing that concerns me, I've been in this industry for 35 years, and I've had people come to the shop and buy some shellfish and ask to buy an extra mesh bag, because they want to, after they buy the shellfish from me, they want to go home and hang it off of the stern of their boat or off of their dock to freshen it. And what they could potentially be doing is taking something that's very safe and legal and then putting it in a body of water that they don't know, that we've all done our homework and made sure that the shellfish is sourced from an approved growing area. And they may take it to an area that is unknown to them, not safe, either from pollution or chemicals or biotoxins, and then, make themselves ill. So, there people that come to me and they want to go like pick the wild blueberries and dig their own clams and take the mussels off the bottom of their float and have like a natural wild experience rather than buying from a dealer. But in the state of Maine, especially with 3,500 miles of coastline, there are a lot of unknowns. And there are a lot of things that you wouldn't expect your average consumer to know or even know how to find. And so I just say, as a word of caution, I would rather that when people do come to Maine on vacation, they buy their shellfish from a certified dealer that they trust rather than harvest their own. There's a lot less risk that way. And then you are coming and supporting the local economy. You're supporting the licensed dealers, you're supporting the harvesters that do need to make a living. And it's just a good way to approach life in general. Like I equate it to, we wouldn't take our children for a walk in the woods and have them pick the pretty red berries, right? Like we all, or the mushrooms, right? There's a certain level of caution that is brought to wild harvesting of other things in our environment that for some reason is not brought to shellfish. And it's very applicable. So I would just suggest that people consider the same parameters in terms of their own health and their family's health when they're thinking in terms of harvesting their own shellfish.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a really good point. Why don't we buy from the people who are trained and know how to make sure that the product is safe, just like in any other consumer thing. Yeah. Yeah, great. Thanks, Barb. I see that we have one of our new panelists who has been able to hop on. Hi, Bo. Welcome aboard. Great to have you. Bo, we are just in the process of, we've heard everybody's introductions. Wondered if you would be able to introduce yourself and say a little bit about what the scope of your business is. You're with Community Shellfish Company, and sort of how you got into this whole thing of shellfish, this whole world.
Well, I've been doing it for about 13 years now. So it was a while. I can't really remember that far back. So we'll have to. No, I used to, I started out in this business working for a group, a lobster co-op who wanted to expand into shellfish and shellfish processing. And I did that for them for 4 or 5 years. And then they decided that they didn't want to do it anymore and concentrate on lobsters. And so I bought that business from them, and I started that in about 2013 with Community Shellfish. And since we've expanded, actually, we've expanded into lobster, into oyster growing. We have an oyster farm, and we do a lot of seafood processing, lobster, mainly clams. And I heard Cole talking about that, and Barbara, about custody and everything. And so we buy clams directly from the harvesters, and we process about 75% of them into Maine frying clams, and the rest we sell into the market, wholesale, retail, and directly to the consumer. Well, I guess which is retail. So yeah, I've been in it for quite a while, and I just heard some of the comments earlier, and about custody and safety of shellfish, and open area, buying product from open areas, and all that is very, very, very true. And so since I'm sort of the middleman in this whole game, it's up to me. So the harvester has the primary responsibility of getting, harvesting the shellfish from open, approved areas that are safe, and then they come to me, and it's my job to, with as best I can, to make sure that that is actually the fact. And then we have to handle our product perfectly in terms of temperature and in terms of just, culling and handling. And then we pass it on to the consumer, or process it under those same very, very stringent sanitary conditions. So it is a long learning curve, and to do it right. And when you do it right, you have a delightful Maine, the best in the world product to give into the world. And if you do it wrong, it's a big problem for everybody, right down to the harvester, and it lowers the quality of all the shellfish that comes into the markets from Maine people. So we all have this sort of joint responsibility to really do the right job in terms of safety and the highest quality. So that's sort of expanded on your question, but there you go. So.
Great, thank you, Bo. I just wanted to remind folks, if you have questions for any of our panelists, feel free to enter them into the Q&A, and we'll get into them into a couple minutes. And I'm going to hand it over to Jessica now, who is going to ask our next round of questions.
Thanks, Natalie. When we were planning this event, we talked about the fact that for the general public, a lot is not known about what happens when a clam is harvested from the mud and what happens in the supply chain for it to end up as that bowl of steamers or fried clam sandwich. So what we'd like to do is walk you through the supply chain, starting with the harvesting of a clam and going through that. And hopefully we'll define some of these terms that we've been throwing around now as well. So first, I'd like to start with Joe, if you can unmute and tell us, just walk us through what you actually do to plan your day, getting out on the flats, what happens, how long you're out there, and then what you do with the clams once you have them all bagged up and ready to go.
Yeah, it's not terribly complicated. I usually go by boat or canoe. I have several boats, a couple of them up in the Taunton River. Just they're smaller, low power or paddled. I have a larger boat for going out into Greater Frenchman's Bay. Today was a short boat ride, maybe a half a mile from where I have one boat kept. So yeah, like yesterday, I had a call from a woman who shucks clams. She wanted some small stuff under 3 inches. I had about 170 pounds. I called her and I told her that probably 30 pounds of them were too big for her purposes, and so she declined to take them. So I took them to my most major buyer. There was no problem, and so I'll sort of try to plan. If this woman wants some small clams, I'll try to accommodate her on a couple days a week. So I think about things like, okay, so I can probably get maybe 125, 150 pounds of what she wants. But like today, I knew I could get over 200 pounds somewhere else of bigger clams. So like us clam diggers, we try to, like anybody, go for the better money. So those are two things I kind of think about. Weather's a big issue for us. Sometimes it's just too much wind for a boat, and maybe you can find a place to walk in okay, or maybe you can take a boat ride along a lee shore to a lee flat, and be safe and reasonably comfortable. And then I do dig quahogs on occasion, although I haven't in the past couple of years. I'll sell those to Maine Shellfish usually. So it kind of revolves around how many I can get and who's paying the best price. And I'm sure that's true for all clammers, and for people who are buying and selling stuff too. Everybody, we're all trying to make a living from this. So I guess that's the first consideration, and then safety's kind of like over all of that, obviously. And then I'll wash the clams really well. Make sure I make sure there's no breakage in them. I make sure they're very clean, and because we are selling food. Then I'll put them in the boat, and I use rollers. They're also called hods in places. Some people just call them baskets. Today I did mostly pulling, which involves wearing a fairly tight glove on your hands. I pull with both hands. Some people call it picking. That's mostly, I guess, kind of south of or west of the Penobscot. But today I pulled clams. Probably was getting something like a pack every 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And then they're washed really well and taken to the buyer where they're weighed. And I get paid and I go home. And like Mike said, that's direct payment to me that I will spend locally in our local economy, which I just wanted to emphasize that's a really big part of clamming, harvesting clams. To me, as a chair of the Frenchman's Bay Shellfish Committee, that our people make good money as supplying the primary supplier of the shellfish food chain, and it's really important for all the people I work with, including the buyers. So that's pretty much it for me. You know, go clamming, get in the boat, clam, wash them up, and take them to the buyer, and then go home.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that.
Yep.
And one of the buyers that we had today, who had a previous buying station down east, actually had to end up working on the water today. It's a nice day, so we won't blame him, Tim Sheehan of Gulf of Maine, Inc. So we're going to go right next to Mike Danforth. If you can tell us what happens when that product shows up at your door at Maine Shell. Can you walk us through those steps? You're on mute, Dan.
Here we go. All right.
Gotcha.
As you said, the digger or harvester brings the product to our door. We check to make sure that the product is tagged properly with the harvest location, time dug, license information on it, which is entered into our system immediately as the gentleman is standing there. Actually, we weigh the clams into 50-pound increments or bushel increments and put them away for later processing, should that processing be shucking or breaking the bushels down into steamers, cleaning them up, making sure there's no breakage, the size is correct. That's something you look at first thing when a guy brings in bushels, to make sure that they're legally of size and whatnot, and they came from a clean growing area. The next morning, we will take the clams and break those down into increments that our customers buy, be it some of our customers like to say that they want a bushel or a half a bushel or a pack, and a lot of the customers buy by the pound. So we weigh those up into different packages and tag each lot or for each customer individually, and distribute them all over to everywhere from small takeouts to larger restaurants. Hospitals don't use many steamers, but we do sell some stuff to them and whatnot. And after that, we just try to get paid. It's just that simple. If there's anything that you'd like to add or you'd like to have me add at this time, I can.
Okay, thanks. That's good for now, Mike. And we're going to open it up to audience questions pretty soon. So I'll give the other panelists a chance to weigh in and we'll circle back with questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, Bo, I know you serve a similar role in a different region. Is there anything that you'd like to add about that process for community shellfish?
Yeah, no, it's very similar as Mike said. It's just a matter of, you know, of buying clams exactly as Joe had said. He's the harvester and he goes out and finds the clams in the open area, brings them to us, and we identify them. We usually know our harvesters. Harvesters tend to, you know, if you dig around Bremen or Waldoboro or whatnot, there's a couple dealers that are there, us and A&A Shellfish, which is Abden Simmons and April. And so we tend to know our harvesters. We happen to, you know, we seem to know where they dig, and we develop, you know, a trusting relationship with them that we're going to get good quality and that we're going to pay them, you know, as best we can. One interesting thing that's happening now is, you know, the clam market, if you're talking about steamers and, you know, whatnot, has been very, very strong in price lately. And it's really, I think this winter was probably the highest price. You know, Mike has been in this for a while, so he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a record price this winter. We paid summer prices at $150 a bushel to the harvesters, and you know, the clam market, the steamer market is changing a little bit, you know, and this has a lot to do with supply and demand. The steamer clam is under a little bit of environmental pressure right now from natural predators such as worms and crabs and whatnot. So but still, we have a very robust market. Maine steamers are beginning to stick out. But basically, back to what your question was, is we buy from our harvesters. We put them immediately. They're marked. We have a system called Oyster Tracker that we electronically do all of our logs, and they go into the cloud. And so once those are all booked in, we put them in our cooler at 35 degrees where they stay until they're used further. We process right on the premises. That's a luxury because we can discern between the size of our clams. The smaller, more delicate clams go into the steamer market, and the slightly larger ones go into the processing department, where they're either sold fresh or frozen. So that's about it. We also sell, basically we have markets pretty much up and down the East Coast, and we're beginning to go nationally a little bit right now. So it's quite an exciting time. But that's basically the chain of custody. So every single step has a chain of custody, as Cole will let you know, from the absolute, the moment they hit our dock to the moment they hit the fork, there's a chain of custody. And it's our job in the middle to, carry our part of that custody through and handle them well, as I said before. So that's really it. It's quite a straightforward business. It could be, wood. It doesn't matter. It's just a chain of custody: harvest, process, and sell. So.
Yeah. Thank you for those perspectives. I'm sure we'll have some questions on the market shortly after we hear from our last two panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to the retail side. And Barb and Quang, if you also want to touch on selling to restaurants and that piece, or some of the other species that you sell. So let's go ahead and start with Quang, and then we'll let Barb wrap up the conversation before we open it up for questions.
Yeah, can you repeat the question again one more time, please?
Yeah, I was just saying, can you share from your perspective? So now we have the clams from the harvester to the dealer, and then to the retailer. So if you could just share a little bit more about your business and how you interact with your customers.
Yeah, so we do a lot of retail at the store, and also we ship it out. We do like customer come in, they walk in, they look at the steamer. They mostly buy lobster. In the summer, like a lot of customers want to buy lobster and steamer together. It's like a combo. So yeah, we serve them in like a 5 or 2-pound bag for them, and prepare it, put in the cooler, and save it in there for them. And then as far as shipping, we usually put them in like a 2-pound bag, 2-pound net, and then we put it in the box with shell eyes, and we usually put like a little bubble wrap around it, so that it doesn't get broken when it transit with FedEx or UPS. And we got great feedback on the way of shipping. You got some broken, but only like about 30 to 5%, so it's not as major. And people love it. People take it. It's really something special for Maine. Most of them are so used to the hard shell clams, so the steamer kind of give it a little bit different, a little bit new from Maine that they have besides lobster. So I think it provide a great value, provide a great add-on into our seafood selections.
Okay, thanks. And just one follow-up too, when we were speaking in advance of the panel, you had talked about also selling razor clams and whelks and some other seafood that doesn't necessarily have a local market, but that you found some niche markets for.
Yeah, so I think I have our Asian community, and they love whelk, the live whelk, and then a razor clam. I've been buying the razor clam from Massachusetts, but I think if we can find a source in Maine that can provide razor clam, I think that's gonna have a huge market. I mean, right now I'm paying like a very good price for razor clam. from Massachusetts. So I think if we can find that source, or even the live whelk, that's just stuck into the lobster boat, those can go. We can take somewhere between 500 to 700 pounds a week on live whelk, and then for razor, that could be about the same amount of product that we can move a week throughout the country to different Asian market, different consumer home, mostly Asian, that can take those on any day.
Great. Thank you for that. All right. So I think
Sure.
we're going to end with Barb. If you want to talk about your customers and some of your products in your store.
Sure. I mean, the topics have pretty much been covered thoroughly to this point. There's one thing that that I think consumers should feel free to do and should do more often, is ask when products were harvested. Every person who is a responsible shellfish dealer or retailer has that information right at their fingertips. Everything, it has a tag that goes with it, that goes right back to, everybody's been talking about the chain of custody. Anything that you get from a wholesale dealer can be traced right back to the original harvester and the original date of harvest. And we all keep extensive records, and I highly recommend that that the consumers just ask when things were harvested, ask how fresh this is. But also that goes back to going to supporting places that are doing a good job. So I would just suggest that it's in your own best interest to find a place that consistently does have good quality and stick with that.
Great. Thanks for those tips, Barb. So I think right now we're going to take a few audience questions. So I'm going to have all the panelists present right now. And let's go ahead. The first question is the million-dollar question, is how did the pandemic affect the clam markets? Who wants to take that one? Go ahead, and you can just unmute yourself.
A lot of the retail items or take-home items that were easy to cook or easy to prepare, the pandemic actually helped the clam market, or the a lot of our retail stores and stuff like that we sold to have greatly increased their demand and pricing for soft shell clams or mussels or a lot of the items like that. It's been a good thing for the soft shell clam and aquaculturally grown mussel and oyster industry, I believe.
Okay. Does anyone else want to add to Mike?
Yeah, I would agree with that very much. Anything to do with takeout and anything to do with home cooking. When the pandemic first hit in March of last year of 2020, things were, just basically all the shutters went on everybody as we all tried to figure out what was going to happen. But and then all of a sudden, boom, 2 months later, our markets just completely exploded with demand for, again, it's the takeout stands, it's the home cooking stuff. It's, it really, I was surprised, to be honest with you, but if you really think it through, it makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I mean, I think this pandemic has terrible, awful effects, and it's a tragedy in many ways. There were some silver linings for the stuff that we do, though. It did pump up demand for what we do. Was it worth it? No, of course not. But that's the fact. It did stimulate our markets for those things that could be prepared in the way I just said. So,
Thanks. Barb, did you want to add to that?
I did. The market totally shifted. I mean, there was solid demand once people realized that they weren't going to be allowed back into restaurants quickly. So the volumes, instead of going to the events or the clam bakes or the lobster bakes or the restaurants or, weddings and receptions and things such as that, that volume stopped, just went to zero. But then the demand for direct sales to direct to consumers or to ship to homes and businesses across the country, that increased. So the businesses that were able to adapt with that shift quickly were able to roll with it. And the ones that couldn't were more deeply affected.
So I'll move on to the next question, which we touched on a little bit with Quang, but why don't I see razor clams or surf clams being sold in Maine? And interestingly enough, I don't know if anyone caught the article in the Ellsworth American today about surf clams, but I'll open that up to anyone who wants to provide some insight on the question.
I'll take a quick stab at razors. I mean, razor clams are really hard to catch. And that's one thing. I mean, it's, and they're really only harvested at low tide and when the tides are very, very big. And the tide goes way out and it's a real drainer. That's when you get razor clams. So they're very difficult to harvest for the harvester. I mean, they do come in, and when they do, they're very, very perishable. And it's an interesting market because when there's razor clams around for the 2 or 3 days of these very, very low tides, there's too many. And then when the tides go away, there's none. So it's a very, very tricky market to maneuver in terms of continuity, in terms of a steady market. So that's why we buy them on appointment through when we get orders for them, which we do quite often. We buy them on appointment. You know, in other words, we fulfill an order, and that's when we ask our harvesters to keep an eye out for them. But I think that at least in Maine, at least around where we are, that's what the case is. They're really hard to tackle, you know, to have a consistent market. So
what kind of culinary use do they have for razor clams? What do we eat those in?
They're delicious. I mean, they're really, it's sort of, I mean, I don't, you know, to be honest with you, I'm not the one to answer this question, but because they can be steamed, they can be, you know, some people eat them raw, and but they're delicious and they're a real delicacy. So I think basically in ceviche or whatnot, but again, I'm not the one to answer that. So
okay.
Anybody else know?
Anyone else want to follow in, if not that question on the razor clam, surf clam?
Jessica, I could just add, I don't know anything about really razor clam marketing, but I do know that there was some interest in shipping them to Europe because there is a pretty robust market in Europe, I think, for razor clams. And in an effort to sort of make that a possibility, the FDA has been working with the European Union for years, trying to get an equivalency agreement for their shellfish sanitation program and ours. That was eventually approved, but the preliminary approval was just for the states of Massachusetts and Washington. And so Maine pushed pretty hard to be included in, you know, that agreement. And we submitted a package this December to be added to the agreement so that people could ship bivalve shellfish from Maine from approved areas into the EU. So we had over probably 16 dealers who were interested in being part of that. And I know razor clams and European oysters were two principal products that people were interested in potentially shipping.
Thank you. So if no one else has anything to add to that, I'll do one last audience question, and then I'm gonna change it over to Natalie to ask another question of the panelist. So people were wondering, is there any time of year or holidays where the market fluctuates a lot in Maine for any shellfish species? Whoever wants to jump in, go ahead. But not all at once. Mike.
Okay. Of course, all the major summertime or warm weather holidays increase demand for a lot of our products, but 4th of July is usually a big steamer holiday. That's traditionally when the highest prices are offered, the largest volumes are harvested, and all the above. But Labor Day, 4th of July, Memorial Day, of course, any of the long weekend holidays, people tend to want to cook steamers or mussels or anything like that. Oysters seem to sell steadily throughout of course, higher during the tourist season, but I can order the same amount of oysters every week for 40 weeks out of the year and then increase it for another 10. It's pretty straightforward. But yes, 4th of July, the demand goes way beyond the supply as a rule.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's a bell curve right over the summertime, and with little bumps here and there. Although again, back to the pandemic comment, we saw a lot of demand in clams this winter. It might have been wholesalers buying to put away in terms of frozen materials, but there was also some demand. So that this market is kind of shifting, and it comes down to a little bit. And I hate to use the global warming thing, which is a serious problem, but as waters stay warmer, harvesting a lot of different species, including soft-shell clams, is more possible in the wintertime. So they're beginning to become more of a 365-day-a-year food. And we've even been catching some lobsters this winter quite a bit. Not a ton or anything, but enough to supply some of our markets. So yeah, so that it's sort of this change between the holiday season, the tourists in Maine, and the availability of the product. You can't pick apples in March, but you can get clams in March because it's not frozen over. So it's that whole dynamic is kind of on the move too a little bit. So we'll see how that shakes out.
Okay. All right. Unless anyone wants to chime in, I'm going to turn Barb. Go ahead.
I'm just going to add one thing. The market is definitely shifting with the pandemic, and I think we're all acutely interested in how this settles out. Typically, the Maine market is stronger and strongest in the summer. After Labor Day, it's strong during the particular week of the holiday, but then really soft in between. But we didn't see that this year. Normally the month of October is abysmally slow because all the summer people go home and their children have to go back to school. That didn't happen. A lot of people didn't go home. And we saw a very strong fall into winter. And even in the spring, they were here. We didn't have to wait for them to leave the metropolitan areas and come up. They were already here. A lot of them had moved here. The real estate market's booming. So I think this is a very timely question. I think it is changing rapidly right before our eyes, and we're all trying to figure out how the dust settles, because it's very volatile right now. It's all in a good thing, but we're going to have to learn new tricks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for that. So many indirect impacts from this, some good, some that just need to adapt to. So that's all the Q&A for now. Natalie, I'll turn it over to you for our next question.
Yeah, my next question for you guys is actually, I want to build on what you're talking about a little bit, but stretch it out to a longer time frame. At the very beginning, those of you who are here from the start, you heard Charles Rutledge from Sunrise County Economic Council give a very brief sort of 50, 60 year view, kind of a long view. And it seems like the last year or so, everything has just gone crazy and changed. But I'm curious about what some of the longer term patterns are that you have seen from your perspective in the business, whether you're a harvester like Joe, or you're one of the dealers, or you sell to restaurants. What are some of the challenges and changes in a longer view that you've seen, both related to the markets, but also to the supply, to what you're able to get or what you're able to harvest? Joe, maybe we can start by putting you on the spot.
Yeah, that'd be good. Well, 10 years ago, there was a red tide. Well, actually 11 years ago, 2009. There was a red tide event that was pretty much the whole state, except for Greater Frenchman's Bay, Greater Blue Hill Bay, and a small area around Machias somewhere. But so that's what got us to get this multi-town program going, 7 towns. So we were pretty well depleted by out-of-state harvesters in 2009 and 10. And then we kind of rebounded pretty well. And then green crabs started to become more of a presence, to a point where they are a large and really detrimental presence to juvenile clams, I guess probably from like microscopic level, or when they set at about 1 millimeter, apparently green crabs set at 2 or 3 millimeters and immediately start eating. So back then, say let's say 2010, 2011, all of our area was producing some degree of clams, some really good growth we saw in 2011, 12, 13. And then for some reason, about half of our area around from sort of the Trenton Bridge around Lemoyne and up into the Skillings River, we started seeing really low recruitment and very, very few new clams coming to harvestable size. We're used to dig large amounts of clams, 4, 5, 6 bushel at times, even 2 or 3. Now in that whole area I just mentioned, a 2 bushel tide is a really good tide, maybe 3, and you sort of stumble on a little spot. But for some reason, then Taunton River has become it's become really good lately. We've been harvesting really well there. But what I'm sort of getting at is what, I can't remember their names now, but talking about longer extended digging time. Given we're seeing heavy predation and lower production in some parts of our flats, and then extending the time that we could be on them, I think I could see a more likelihood of overharvest with an extended season. To some degree in our program, we're working with that to sort of cover that. We have a lot of rotational areas. I think we've got 16 total areas that are rotated. Some places we're only allowed to be dug for 2 months. That seems to be working overall for us. So that kind of on the harvester end and production end, we're somewhat protected. But still, if we're looking at putting another month on the shoulders of the seasons in the fall and in the spring, and we're looking at probably hurting spawning individuals and stuff that we might have dug at a higher price in the summer. Though, like everybody says, right now the prices has been summer prices all winter, and will probably go up from here. I guess my concern there is harvesting and helping to ensure that we don't over harvest what we have, and pay attention to that, and maybe maybe the state could do something like put in an upper size limit, which we in Frenchman's Bay, all of Frenchman's Bay now, from Gouldsboro to our 7-town area, and now Bar Harbor, are instituting a 4-inch maximum limit. I'm told scientifically that 3.5 inches is more likely the correct size, which I can see because there's very few 4-inch clams. So, as a harvester and the chair of this committee, and working with DMR and people like Brian Beal and others, I just see we need to pay better attention to how we handle growing areas to allow optimum spawning and protection for the species itself throughout the year and into the future. And I don't really have any answers for that, but I think there's, through rotations and through possibly an upper size limit, allowing spawning animals to survive longer would be helpful at the beginning of the supply chain.
Thanks, Joe. Barb, I saw at one point as Joe was talking that your head was nodding, so I figured I'd check in with you.
Yeah, I think Joe brings some really good points. Like, even if the market is strong and the price is up and people are here all year round, if the clams aren't there, if the clams have already been dug out of that area, it doesn't mean you can't make more. If they're not there, they're not there. So if our economy, if our supply and demand chain is based on what our environment has been able to produce over a long period of time, I mean, the only thing that can make an area more productive really is either better management, better protection, or seeding, and I think then maybe aquaculture, where seeding programs will become more important. As the demand increases and the economy increases, you can't harvest them if they're not there. So it's just a very dynamic, fluid situation with any marine resource, not just clams. There's a lot to it, and I think that was a good point.
Yeah, it's amazing doing as you all know, this is the third in this series, and the need for nimbleness along every single step of the supply chain keeps getting reiterated. How you all at different places in the industry just are constantly paying attention to changing trends, and what decision do I have to make now? It seems like it's always a fluid goal. So I'm curious to check in with some of the others, like Mike or Bo or Quang. What do you guys been seeing in terms of some long-term patterns, in terms of what you're able to get from your harvesters, or what your markets are sort of asking for, even maybe before the pandemic, or sort of parallel to it?
If I can just say something, one thing that we're looking at this, obviously through quite a fine lens, and the one thing that you have to consider is, and maybe this is obvious, but I'll just put it out there anyway. This clams, like anything else, are a commodity. And so all the things that we're seeing, these record high prices, very high prices, I'll say, is all a function of that. The whole supply demand curve has sort of changed, and whereby there used to be a lot of clams around, even 12, 13 years ago, when I started out in this business, there was a lot of clams to be dug and a lot of clams to be had, and the prices were low in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s for bushels in the normal times, and a little higher in the summer. But now we're seeing these high prices, and it's directly a function. It's no magic. It's directly a function of how many clams there are versus what the demand is, and that's what we're seeing. And all the things, we've got predators, we've got warming waters, and another thing that we have a problem with in Maine right now is water quality. And I know you guys touched on it earlier. But, a lot of areas, because of warming waters, which we know they are, and because of encroachment on the waterfront by homes and whatnot, there's water quality issues up and down the coast. Areas are opened, areas are closed. In Bremen, where I live, we have our biggest producing cove went from an open designation. Now it's seasonal conditional because of water quality. So we've got issues up and down, and it all is putting pressure on this commodity. And so if demand goes up, the price is going to go up. And just like in lobsters in 2003, the price got too high, and then the market backed off because you know, a $35 clam roll is not going to be that popular. So, you know, but that is the balancing of what we're seeing right now in the clam market, in my mind. So, and that's what we all have to deal with, is how much price are people going to pay for product right now? I mean, we were selling processed clams this winter at prices that we just could not believe that were being paid, because but that's the price that they were, because of that was the supply and that was the demand. So, and you know, you're seeing that all over. Lobsters, the markets are obviously a little more, you know, less volatile than clams, or maybe the same, but you know, it's the same thing. There's very high prices for lobsters on the dock right now. So this demand is going up and this supply is staying the same to perhaps going down a little bit as well. Certainly in the clam market, the supply is a lot different than it was 10 years ago. So it's a fascinating topic if you choose to look at it in that light, in my mind. So all these different elements. So anyway, that was my 2 cents.
Great. Thank you, Bo. Bo, you raised the water quality question as being one of the things that impacts the business. And I just wanted to ask that question of Cole in terms of what have you been seeing from a public health perspective and a water quality perspective in terms of possibly changing trends, or how water quality impacts the market?
Well, Maine is fortunate in that we don't have a lot of point sources of pollution overall for our 3,500 miles of coastline. But we do have a lot of non-point source pollution, things like, say, marshes where maybe wild ducks go at a certain time of the year, and you know, then they contribute to fecal coliform in the water at a certain period of time. And those areas are always going to fluctuate, you know, if we have very wet years versus dry years, and you know, as wildlife populations change, you know, you're always going to have that reclassification going on. Also, as human populations change, you know, if more people are coming to the coast, and you know, if they're going to be in houses that are on the shore that maybe they only used for a few months in the summer with a couple of people, but now they're renting to 10 people, and maybe a septic system isn't designed exactly for that, you know, we can have new problems pop up. We do shoreline checks of pollution sources for all of our growing areas, but you know, I would actually, Bo has been instrumental in this in his community, where really the town, the municipal shellfish programs can take a lot of ownership in addressing water quality issues. You know, if we identify declining water quality, they can try and find the sources, you know, doing some pretty creative things. A lot of communities, Joe is the same thing in Frenchman's Bay, doing MST testing. So it's a test using DNA to try and establish what is causing the poor water quality. You know, is it birds? Is it humans? Is it mammals? And so in using some of those tools, the municipal shellfish committees can really help identify the problems and resolve them, and sometimes can do it before a downgrade is required. So they can be very proactive. And we've tried to deliver tools so that people can do that. We have a web map available where people can see each station that we sample water quality at and what the calculated score, it's called a P90 score. It's sort of like an average, but not quite. And they can see what that score is. And it's kind of like, we call it a stoplight layer. It's coded so that, you know, green is really good and clean water. Yellow is, you know, maybe a little bit concerning. You know, black is a restricted area standard and red is prohibited. And so people can see, you know, if they had a station that was in the green zone and it's, you know, starting to transition into yellow, they can maybe be proactive and take some action to address pollution issues. So there's a lot that communities can do with regard to water quality if they have some kind of advance notice.
A quick follow-up related to public health and water quality and clam health is are there any requirements to purge the clams before selling them?
So that goes to our classification program. If an area is classified as open approved, that means that a harvester can go in, or an aquaculturist could grow product there and sell directly to a market. They don't have to go through any special steps. If an area is classified as restricted, then they would have to either relay the product, which means basically transport it to an open area and allow it to purge for a specific period of time with a special permit. Or you could depurate the product, which means it has to go to a specific facility. We have one in Maine that's set up to basically hold the shellfish in tanks and test them when they come in and test them when they go out and make sure that they've purged over a certain amount of time. But all of that purging requires special permits, and you have to do it through department permission.
Okay. Mike or Quang, do you guys have any additions or thoughts related to sort of long-term trends that you're seeing? Mike, with Maine, you've been with Maine Shellfish for a while. What have you guys been seeing for changes in terms of what the market's asking for, but also what you're able to get over the long term?
Well, I guess I'm getting away from the question a little bit with this concern, but when I started commercial fishing, I was a scallop fisherman, inshore and offshore, whatever. But when I started, we kind of on the end of a booming time, and what happened was they offered higher prices. So we'd go to less productive areas, which would produce spat and whatnot for the resource. And we ended up obliterating the scallop resource for the coast of Maine, which is it's kind of healing at this point, but it really hasn't fully. And my concerns are Joe's speech about deciding where he wants to go and he can only get 2 bushel here or 4 bushel there. It makes the less productive areas, when you start giving record prices year round for this type of product, it makes the less productive areas more appealing to the harvesters. And my concern is there'll come a time in a day that we're not going to have clams to make more clams at some point. We're gonna have a resource crash in certain areas or something like that, just due to the fact that economically they can harvest lower quantities of the product. And that's a concern of mine, whether it happens or not. Maybe it's a conspiracy theory, I don't know, but we seem to have plenty of those now. But I watched it happen with the inshore Maine scallop resource, and unfortunately was part of it. But you can kind of see the same trend happening in the soft shell clam industry at this point.
Yeah, can I add in something here, Mike?
Sure, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, I was part of that end of scallops too. That was kind of like a Duck Island adventure. But yeah, I think what I'm hearing now from myself and from you and a couple others, and Barb included, is if there's no product, you can't sell it. It's not going to regenerate. I think that if we've not already been there and are staying there at the moment, I think we need to really look at preserving spawning animals in the wild. And yeah, aquaculture is something we all need to look at, I think. But if we could keep more spawning adult clams in the mud, and maybe by state mandate, because I think that's the only way it's really going to work at a real scientific level. Like Dr. Beal always says 3.5 inches. Well, that makes sense because there aren't really any 4-inch clams that could be enough and in proximity, close enough to each other to actually successfully spawn and large settlement and recruitment. So I just wanted to add that, I think there are some things that we can do. On a municipal level, we can do a little bit. I know that if we tried to go at Gouldsboro or Bar Harbor tried to go to a 3.5-inch maximum, we would have hit some serious headwinds or something else. But we could get away with the 4-inch limit. But I think at this point, and looking at large areas here that just aren't really receding, and partly due to several years ago, people were really hitting those really big clams in Raccoon Cove in Lemoyne and in the Skillens River. And Frenchman's Bay is something of a closed system. So the clams that we have here, that's where the clams come from. They don't come from Millbridge or Deer Isle. They come from Frenchman's Bay. So I'm really concerned about long-term future for growing the resource. And I think there are ways to work with it. And I think the state needs to start considering some more steps that they can take, namely the higher and size limit. I'm done.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, so Joe raised some questions about what the state can do, and I'm wondering, Cole, can I ask you to just outline a little bit for folks, and I don't want us to go down this rabbit hole because we covered it a lot in the 2 previous sessions, but just a quick summary of the relationship between the state and the towns in shellfish management, like how that's set up.
Yep. Yeah, as you said, your other 2 sessions covered a lot of this, but for anybody who didn't see those, the state of Maine is unique, one of only 2 states in the country that allow co-management of bivalve shellfish resources, not scallops. I know Mike used that as an example, but that is a state managed resource. But clams and oysters, they are allowed to be managed by municipalities if they develop a shellfish ordinance. And so there are some regulations, laws and regulations that govern how those ordinances need to be structured. They include things that the municipalities can do, like licensing. They can implement conservation closures. Joe referenced that. They do have a pretty elaborate process in the Frenchman Bay group for closing certain flats at certain times and reopening others at different times to either preserve the resource or maximize the return on what is harvested out of those areas if you harvest them in a certain time frame. So the towns and municipalities, again, they can do a lot in resource management. You know, if they survey their resource to know what's there for both harvestable resource as well as reproductive biomass, as well as seed, you know, it gives a really good, robust idea of how to manage whatever species of shellfish is in their ordinance and that they want to either, you know, grow the resource or harvest or whatever it is that they want to do, or transition. You know, some communities are transitioning from soft shell clams to doing reseeding projects more with quahogs or hard clams because they feel like they're having better survival. But there's a lot that the municipalities can do. And really, for the most part, it's in their hands, including implementing a maximum size for a harvest limit, as Joe referenced. Towns are able to do that as part of their ordinance. So,
great. Thank you so much, Cole, for that context. Jessica, Cole just mentioned quahog, and I think you had a question about quahogs.
I did. In our planning call, I heard Barb and a few others talk about the market demand for quahogs right now. And I was recently looking at the DMR landings data for 2020. And while I think last year there was a little bit of a reduction from prior years, I think a lot of that may be COVID related, but who knows? But there's been a steady increase in quahogs over the last 10 years in terms of landings. So I was curious if any of the panelists wanted to talk about that product, and then we're going to open it up to the panelists to ask questions of each other. And for anyone in the audience, the Q&A box should still be available if you have questions as these discussions continue. Does anyone want to jump in? Barb, go ahead.
I'll start. I think a lot of the increased supply and demand, both for quahogs in Maine, comes from what we were just touching on, is sort of the reduction in successful settlement of the natural soft shell clam beds because of predominantly green crab predation at the seed level. The smaller the clam is, the more successful a crab will be in eating it for lunch. So when the green crabs, which are an invasive species, were introduced to Maine, there was an immediate decline in soft shell clam successful settlement rates. And then in a lot of the areas, the hard clam, we've seen that the areas where the hard clams were have expanded because they were able to set more successfully because they have a harder clam, as the common name suggests. And Cole also alluded to this. So it's just, there are always natural fluctuations between populations in the ecosystem. This one was precipitated by an invasive species event, but that is what we're seeing. Is we're seeing fewer soft shell clams being recruited into the areas that were typically soft shell clam coves. We're seeing more hard shell clams replace the soft shell clams in those areas. And because there are more hard clams available, when the clammers go to dig, even 4 or 5 years ago, I had people that were harvesters selling me soft shell clams that went to dig and were able to harvest more hard clams than soft shell clams just because that's what was there. And it was a surprise to them as well. And so then, you know, you want to still support the local harvesters, you still want to pay them. So then it becomes my job to try to market something like that. So then I present to my restaurants or to my retail customers that, hey, we now we have this thing, and this is also a Maine product. And then a lot of the new things become more of an education piece and teaching people that this is also available and this is also local. And that's where that started. And then, you know, everybody else can, it becomes an integrated part of the natural economy at this point. But at one point it was odd and we all had to shift with it.
Thanks, Barb. Do any other panelists want to follow up on that thread? Or right now, I can also just open it up for you all to ask questions if you're curious about anything that you've heard. I know we have a pretty broad span of geographic areas represented. Anything that you're not seeing yet in your region that you heard, or go ahead and just, I'll open up the floor.
Well, I'll tell you one interesting thing. At least I think it's interesting. So we have, we're talking about our clam flats going away and hard clams coming in. Well, we have this one clam flat named Sam's Cove, and Hannah Annis, who's one of the DMR scientists, who's very great person, that's given us a lot of help with our clam flats. We went over to look at Sam's Cove, and so we're typically soft shell clams in Bremen. So, but we went over there and she said, oh my gosh, you know, if you had to see every single clam predator in Maine that was in the flats, you would go to Sam's Cove and you would see every single, you've got worms, you've got snails, you've got crabs, you've got, you know, everything. So forget about the clams. She didn't say that, but that was her general advice. But what we did find is we found a whole load of quahogs that had never been really spotted before. And, you know, it's obviously things are changing a bit. And all of a sudden in 4 or 5 years, we're going to have an excellent quahog fishery in Bremen. So, you know, I just thought that was really, really fascinating. You know, as things are shifting around, it was really, really fascinating. So anyway, that's my little tale about quahogs, but we don't sell them and we don't deal in them ourselves at Community Shellfish. So not around here. So
I'm not really the person to speak to this, Jessica, but when we were preparing for this panel, I remember a really interesting thing that somebody said. I'm not exactly sure who it was, but they said that there was, you know, the soft shell clam is kind of a regional market, is my understanding. You know, sort of New England, northern New Englanders know what a steamer is and they like it. But a lot of other people don't know what steamers are, and they don't particularly like it, you know, like eating the belly and whatnot. And so somebody was mentioning that hard clams, quahogs, are becoming more popular because people are familiar with them. And when they come up to vacation and tourism, you know, do tourism in Maine, they're asking for them more. And I thought that was really interesting. So maybe somebody who knows more about that could talk about it.
Yeah, I think Barb had mentioned that about the southern, New England. Go ahead.
Yes, that was me. Yeah, it's interesting when you do put something new out in front of someone, then they recognize that, and that just automatically opens their eyes, and they just said, "Oh, I had no idea you had these here." Like or I grew up harvesting these off of Nantucket with my grandfather, and you know, it becomes it creates instant popularity when you're putting something in front of someone that they already recognize. And that is part of what has happened with that species.
Well, just kind of anecdotally, I grew up in upstate New York, and you'd see there's several restaurants. A very famous place called Sharky's. You could actually look it up online. They sell speedies and steamed clams. Speedies are kind of a kebab thing, but steamed clams, any place you see steamed clams in upstate New York, Pennsylvania, I know a lot of hard clams go from wherever they're harvested to upstate New York and Pennsylvania. But if you see steamed clams in a restaurant window, it's hard clams. So it's just, and that's a large segment of people that come to our area are from, you know, the nearby states where hard clams are their steamers to start with. So just something from my past, I guess, and still true.
Thanks, Joe. Quang, I'm kind of interested on your website for Fisherman's Net. You have a number of different species, some a lot of local product, and then some product that you are getting from elsewhere around, I think, the states and otherwise. Do you want to speak to some of the uses that you know, quahogs or soft shells or some of these other species are used in other cultures? And you are muted right now. Okay, we might need to circle back to, oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah, perfect. So I mean, I think we definitely have a good niche of consumer that have a different culture as far as food. And we get in, you know, stuff from, you know, black clams to cockle to goudak. We're getting some king crab in as well, live king crab from Norway and Alaska and king crab in our store. So I mean, it's definitely the more that we can offer the consumer, the more, you know, we can add on the value of the product, and that we're looking into the traditional product of Maine, you know, like lobster and quahog and steamer, and it just, you know, create like an online marketplace for people to come in, and instead of, you know, going to an actual store, going to Maine and buy lobster, they can now get all their seafood in one place. And I think, you know, from my perspective of the Asian culture, we have, you know, we love seafood, and I think it just helps so much to add on those products, and I hope, you know, Maine can offer or have more products to offer as far as shellfish, you know, to get in quahog and the hard-shell clam as well.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Natalie.
Yeah, I'll jump in with a question. I'm curious from all of you. This is an easy question, right? It's a personal question. What do you love about what you do? What do you love about either being a harvester, or why do you stick to it as a dealer or a buyer? What sort of grabs you as this being your life's work?
I can start first since I'm on mute. I think, it's just the idea of helping people to prepare the best meal, the freshest seafood. A lot of, my customer in the area where there's no ocean, there's no fresh seafood around, and the ability to ship them overnight products, some live lobster, when live steamer, when they just open up the box and they have, something that's straight from the ocean to them alive. We, as much, we appreciate it, but we are from Maine, it seems to be normal. But people that, from say like in the mid coast or like in the Midwest, there's no ocean around. So those things make their day, make their party, and they make their holiday special with their family. So that's what I enjoy the most about the business.
That's great. And it sounds like, Quang, you're hitting a whole different market, which is really, really very cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Let's go with Bo. What do you love about being in this business?
Let's see here, right there. Well, it's a really fast moving business, and I think it combines a lot of things. It combines, some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life, which are the harvesters, whether they're lobster or clam or whatnot, or oyster growers or whatever. It's such a great, fantastic group of people to work with. And it's as I said, it's fast moving. It's forever, it's always changing, and there's always a new challenge. It's teamwork with my company. We have 25 employees, and, we're all working hard to push this thing through and as people have said, to get people the best stuff we can. And so it's just a very rewarding business that really has its feet on the ground. So that's what I love about it.
That's great. And since you mentioned that you love working with harvesters, we'll go to Joe next. Joe, what do you love about being a harvester?
I was thinking I already talked enough, but I guess I grew up next to a bait shop in upstate New York, a sporting goods place that sold lots of bait. And the little girl who's my age, and I would go in the creeks and ponds and in backyards picking night crawlers or catching minnows or catching crayfish and sell to her parents. I guess it's kind of an extension of that I do now. But, it's working with the people, like Bo said, is amazing. And like right now, I'm seeing this progression of spring wildlife, birds. And I don't know if you guys are aware of that, the osprey nest that was destroyed by a fire last year in Lemoyne. Well, today there is a pair of ospreys there. As I was driving to sell my clams, I noticed that they were carrying sticks to put on this man-made platform. And now there's several species of ducks around, more than several. There's clam diggers around me. We talk, we compete a little bit. We lie to each other about where we are or whatever. And I always say it beats working. And It also said that for a clam digger, every day is Friday, because you don't really have to go tomorrow, but you should. It just affords a really good living, a good lifestyle. And for me, being outdoors and around nature like that and with the people I work with, I find that hard to beat anywhere. Although I do enjoy working in restaurants, which I've done throughout my life at some way or another. And this is food too. There's just a lot of good stuff about the whole business itself and the outdoor experience. So that's and like I said, it's kind of an extension of what I grew up doing, playing in the creeks and the ponds and people's backyards. So that's me.
Great. Thanks, Joe. How about Barb? What do you love about being in this industry?
It's funny because I have to agree with both of them. I also grew up crabbing and fishing, and I was in a family that didn't have a lot of money for like toys. So I went and found my own things to play with, and quite often I can just remember having the backyard in my grandparents' house. Anything that would hold water, I would put seawater in it and then collect things and sort them by size or cull condition or whether they were male or female. I was just like this little mini scientist. And I mean, I just laugh when I look at my life right now because I still live by the tide. Bo said it's a wonderful community. It's a prideful community. And I feel like being the business owner or even, you know, being the harvester, you get to choose who you're going to surround yourself with. You don't have to go into an office where someone else has hired everyone and some people are annoying or, you know, not honest. You get to pick and choose and you don't have to deal with the people that aren't honest or don't have good character. You choose. And you get to own lots of boats. And it's just a very like right from the lobstermen or, you know, the people that catch the bait, like everybody in Maine that does a good job has so much pride. And I feel honored to be the person that's like the face in front of the people who visit, because I get to pass that on. And you know, I just do as good a job as I can, and I feel as though that passes the sense of pride on to the people who pull in my driveway, and I'm honored to be that person.
That's great. That's great. I'm loving this so far. Every day is Friday, and you get to own lots of boats. I'm in the wrong line of work. And Mike, I think I would love to hear from you as well. What do you love about being in this work?
As a dealer, as a former fisherman, I mean, the fisheries or clamming, shellfishing, all that stuff isn't, the actual act of it hasn't changed since its inception. You know, commercial fishermen or commercial fisheries as a rule, that's the only industry left in the world that you hunt the product, so to speak. And to me, that's kind of neat when you think of it that way. It's rewarding. I love dealing with all of my customers. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds here that different personalities and different things you talk about, different things you learn from different customers every day. It's been a really rewarding career overall. And I've met a lot of good people, from harvesters to processors to people that run billion-dollar companies, seafood companies in Massachusetts. So it's been really cool for me to be able to interact well with people from, like I said, the harvester sector all the way to the guys that look at half pennies on whether their businesses make money or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah. All
right.
Thanks, Mike. And Cole, you're from a different angle in this whole industry, but you've got a pretty important role. What is it that you love about the work that you do in this industry?
It's a pretty simple answer for me. I used to work in federal fisheries management. I managed ground fish, was on technical committees, did Atlantic herring, a whole bunch of things. And it wasn't particularly rewarding. I'll leave it at that. I feel like in this job where I am now, because it's state managed, if we want to work hard to change things, to reclass areas, to improve the situation for harvesters and growers, then we can do that, and we can see almost immediate results of that work. And that's what we're here for. You know, we're serving the Maine people. And so that's what I enjoy about my job.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Cole. I just want to check in with Jessica if you have any more questions or know of any other questions coming in. We're getting close to time, but.
Yeah, I'll just note, so there was a question about depuration for an individual that Cole typed an answer to. So hopefully everyone in the audience can see that. And then we did have one more question. So from the audience, and I think it's probably a Cole question too. So if we have time, but was there anyone else that you wanted to check in with, or did we get everyone with that last question?
I think we got everyone.
Okay.
Yell at me if we didn't, anyway.
Okay. So I'm going to go to the question that we didn't answer yet. And it's about, it says, if aquaculture operations can legally sell smaller clams than the wild harvesters, does this create an unfair marketing advantage for farmers? Cole, do you want to address that question?
I mean, I couldn't speak to whether it's an unfair marketing advantage or not. You know, somebody in the, you know, who deals in those products and might be interested in what our sublegal wild product might want to weigh in.
Is there any clarification though on the sizes?
Well, we have minimum sizes for several species, and aquaculturists, I believe the premise of aquaculturists being exempt from those minimum sizes is because they're owning and growing the product. So if they have a market for something smaller on seed that they bought from, say, a hatchery or a nursery that, you know, didn't necessarily come out of the wild population, then I believe that's why it's allowed. I am not aware and don't see a lot of tiny product being sold below sublegal limits. I don't think people prefer less than 2-inch clams, say. I don't think people prefer 1-inch oysters, say, you know, so I don't see it a lot, but I don't think, again, that, you know, I would be the authority on whether aquaculturists do market a lot of small product.
Okay, thanks. I think that's fine for now. And we're just about at time, and I know Natalie has a wrap up. So I think we've covered all the audience questions that I could see. So I'll turn it back to you, Natalie.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank everyone. This has been a super interesting panel, and I feel like we've connected a lot of dots with the first couple panels. So I just want to remind folks that you can hear the first couple panels. The full webinars are posted both on the Maine Sea Grant website and on the Maine Shellfish Learning Network website. And then they're also in the archives at WERU Community Radio. And so you can hear all of that. This particular webinar will get shortened to a 1-hour piece, which will air this Friday at 4 on WERU Community Radio. And I wanted to thank the Maine Fishermen's Forum for helping host this event and everyone who attended. And I also wanted to thank especially all of you guys, our speakers, starting at the top of the hour with Charles Rudlich from Sunrise County Economic Council, Joe Parada, commercial harvester from Hancock, Mike Danforth from Maine Shellfish, Quang Nguyen from Fisherman's Net, Bo Marsh from Community Shellfish Company, Barb Scully from Scully Sea Products, and Cole Canwett from the Department of Marine Resources. I also wanted to thank Mike Talhauser and Gabby Hillier, who helped with the behind the scenes support, as well as our amazing IT team at the University of Maine, and Jessica, my co-host. And thanks, everyone. Look forward to seeing you at next year's forum in person.
I just want to thank you, Natalie. Natalie has done more work than anyone, both on the live events and on editing a lot of great content down to an hour radio show. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that comes out. And not only this event, but you've also helped the Fishermen's Forum with a lot of their other virtual content. So thanks, Natalie. And again, just to reiterate, all the panelists, thank you for your time. We know you're gearing up for the season to start, which I think it already has really started. So thanks for taking time away from your businesses to talk to us and all the audience. So thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.